Good evening, guys. Hey, a lot of times when I come to you like this, it's very rushed. It's in the evening. And once again, this is in the evening, but this is something that I've been thinking about and working over and mulling over because it goes against what stereotypical religion would say is okay. What I'm going to tell you tonight is after multiple times of study, review, but it may challenge some of your thinking. We've been told as church people that we are not to ask extravagant things of God. God meets our needs, but not necessarily our wants. And I'm going to tell you tonight that that's bad theology. It's bad theology because the Bible is full of examples of people asking outrageous things. Raise my dead daughter. If I can just touch the hem of his garment. Faith is rewarded. And it's not a new concept. It goes all the way back into the Old Testament. And we can see it in desperation crying out to God for outrageous things. And I want to talk to you about that tonight. I want to challenge you in your ministry, in your service to a ministry, in your daily walk with Jesus, in your business, in your personal relationships in which you're talking to people about Jesus. Be bold in asking God for things. But there's a pattern. And I want to talk to you about that pattern. We're going to be in 1 Samuel tonight. It's in chapter 1. If you know me, then you know I'm reading from the Message Bible because that's what I like to study out of. But whatever translation you've got is just fine, because let me tell you, the one translation that's important is the one that you read. So if you'll travel on down with me, in between verses 9 and 11 here, real quick, just a little bit of backstory. There's a lady by the name of Hannah. She has no kids, which is a big deal for an Israelite woman. It is a big deal for her husband. Now, her husband has another wife, and that wouldn't go over real well in my house, but her husband has another wife, and the other wife has children, and is constantly grinding that in on Hannah, and look how many kids I have, and you don't even have but one, blah, blah, blah. It's a wonder she didn't punch her in the mouth, but she was a good Israelite woman, and instead of doing that, she went to the temple, and she made a vow. In her praying to God, she made a vow, and she said, "Oh, God of angel armies." Real quick, just let me stop there. That statement alone says, I know you command events in this world through people to carry out your actions. It acknowledges that you've got angels here with me that can act on my behalf, that you are about action, and that you are mighty. Just in her statement, she's declaring her faith. Oh, God of angel armies, if you'll take a good look and a hard look at my pain, if you'll quit neglecting me and go into action for me by giving me a son, I will give him completely, unreservedly to you. I'll set him apart for a life of holy discipline. How bold is Hannah? She says, if you'll look at my pain, if you'll quit neglecting me. Realistically, this is bold because I don't think I would be so bold to take God to task on that. But she says it after acknowledging His greatness, who He is. She says, this is my situation. This is my situation, and this is where it's come to, God. But if you will give me a son, then I will completely and unreservedly dedicate him back to your service. Let me talk to you about what is occurring here. First of all, it's because of the desire of her heart that she calls out to God. Now, God places desires in our heart for use for His service. Her desire to have a son stems a prophet that 2 books of the Bible are named after. Her desire was placed there by the need to fulfill what God had called her to do. God had designed her to be a mother. It was her place inside of the family. It was her desire to fulfill that obligation to her husband to bring forth a child. This was the desire of her heart. She was sincere in her asking. When she made this vow, a vow before God for an Israelite inside of his temple, carried the utmost severity for breaking that type of vow. So she was very sincere in that. Okay? And it lines up with God's word and God's plan. Okay? When we go boldly before God and we begin to ask for things, if you're in ministry and you're pastoring a church and the church needs funds for a building program, go before God and say, God, if you will, fill this bank account with this amount of money and call it by name. And God, when you do, we will build the building to do the task that you've laid before us. And if you decide that there's another task, oh God, we will repurpose those funds and we will use them for what you've told us to, if you will provide that funding. Nothing wrong with that. I think that's going boldly before, and I think it lines up with the principles that we see here. Now, she's acknowledged who God is. She's pled the desires of her heart, knowing that they came from God. She was sincere in her asking. Okay? And in no way was this oh, please God, be the genie I need. This was her acknowledging Him, showing the desire, being sincere. It lines up with God's plan. And what does that generate? God comes into action. God comes into action for Hannah, and we see that on over in verse 19. And God immediately, God immediately begins to work things and twist things around in her life. So let's read verse 19. Up before dawn, they worshiped God and returned home to Ramah. Okay, her husband slept with Hannah, and God began making necessary arrangements in response to what she had asked for. Okay, God began making the necessary arrangements. Her plea inside of that temple created an action on the part of God. Okay, now she gets the kid. Kid's born. Hannah goes back before God, and she begins to worship. In chapter 2, verse 1, I am bursting with God news. I am walking on air. I am laughing at my rivals. I am dancing my salvation. Her response was to an answered prayer. Not the child, but in realizing God was God. In this, she is not as excited, and if you go on to read the rest of the prayer, you'll see that she's not as excited about the son that she got from God, because she'd already pledged to give that son back to God. She's not as excited as about, I'm getting tongue-tied. She's not as excited about that child as she is about God being God, God hearing her prayer and realizing the need and feeling the need, and it's about God being God. And she says, I am bursting with God news, not good news, but God news, because she was dancing her salvation, a joyful event. Now, long story short, she does give Samuel up to the temple. He begins to be raised by Eli, and I want to take you on over to verse 21 in chapter 2, because this is a culmination that I think we need to get. And this is the culmination of the story for Hannah. It says, God was most especially kind to Hannah. She had 3 more sons and 2 daughters. The boy Samuel stayed in the sanctuary and grew up with God. Okay? God honored the agreement in full, but then continued to bless her because of her obedience. She made a vow. God honored that vow with Samuel. Hannah then rejoiced at God being God, acknowledging who He was, completing her vow, maintaining her vow, because it tells us that religiously, year after year after year, she came to bring clothes and stuff to Samuel. God said, this is somebody that is doing what they were called to do. They acknowledge me, they praise me, they worship me, they rejoice in my gifts to them, I'm going to continue to bless. Because of her calling out to God, because of what she did, not only did he meet the immediate need, not only did he answer the prayer, but then in God's goodness, he goes above and beyond even what Hannah could ever have wanted or ever have thought of. Okay? God's purpose was fulfilled, and Hannah continued to receive blessing. In our daily walk, our ministries, our obligations, our jobs, we are given the opportunity to reach out and grasp those desires that God has laid on our heart. And we need to be bold in asking God. We need to be bold in that asking. We need to make sure that it lines up with His plan. And we need to be bold in asking. It's not arrogant of us to ask God to give us what we feel we need to complete a task that He's laid on our hearts. And if we are obedient and we line up with the will of God, then God will continue to bless. And I'll use this example, and this is going to be controversial, but some people say, why does so-and-so live in such a big house? Why does their church have so many members? Why do they make such an outrageous salary? Why do they have a private plane? And I'm going to the extreme here, but you get the gist. But what we don't look back and see is, let me tell you, if somebody starts a church in their garage or meeting in a school building 8, 9, 10 years ago, and within 10 years that church has grown to 10,000 plus people, multiple different sites, and people are getting saved by the 100, God's hand is in that. Okay? Stop and ask yourself if that person went to God and said, God, if you will allow me this opportunity, I will do what you tell me to do. And God says, there's a person I can use, there's a ministry I can sow into, that's something I can get behind, and I'm going to bless them. And after the initial blessing, because they were righteous in their stewardship of that blessing, then God continues to bless them. Now, I'm not saying everybody should be in ministry because they want a $500,000 home or $1 million home. What I'm saying is that if the person that God blesses is a good steward with what He blesses them with, then He's going to continue to bless them beyond what they even desired to have. He took Hannah's initial request, and He continued to bless her long past what her initial request was. Sometimes what we see as obscene blessings or excess is just God pouring out upon somebody even more than they even had dared to ask for. And when God blesses somebody to that point, there's no reason for us to be jealous. What we need to say is, God, use me in a way that creates the result that you want to bless me even further. Because if God wants to continue the blessing in your life, then it means you are actively doing what you committed to do, and He is rewarding that. There's nothing wrong with that, guys. So be bold when you ask God. Don't just say, God, give me just enough to get by. Say, God, give me enough to change the course of people's lives by giving them the opportunity to meet you. Because there is nothing greater than meeting Jesus. And I know that Jesus is a free gift, but it takes money to get that gift to people sometimes. Okay? So there's nothing wrong in receiving the blessing of God. There's nothing wrong with boldly asking for the blessing of God. But remember, you must rightly steward the blessing of God. Guys, I'm going to jump off here because I went a little bit longer than I normally intend to. But until we get a chance to meet again, God bless you and keep you. May you be safe and be bold.